and welcome to the final day of Career Bootcamp 2023. This afternoon's session is titled Managing Your Relationships with Your Manager. Please note that this session will be offered in English and French simultaneously. To view the French session, please return to the agenda. Before we start, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I am located is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, and is directly adjacent to the Haldimand Treaty territory. Career Bootcamp is the largest conference in the GC, and the only goal is to support you in your career journey. As we move through today's session, please share your questions by using the Q&A button in the language of your choice. You can vote for questions you like by clicking the thumbs up button. As with all Fin sessions, this session will be recorded, so you can go back to check out the recordings and the insights at a later date. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Diana to get us started this afternoon.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Haley, for that wonderful introduction. Welcome to our session today on managing your relationships with your manager. My name is Diana Best, and I am thrilled to be your moderator today in what I'm sure will be an insightful discussion with our two amazing panelists. So a little bit about me. I am here in Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I started in government as a student in 2011, and I worked for over a decade in the field of personnel security. And then I decided, why not try something new? Which is something I love about our employer, the Government of Canada. There are ample opportunities available. Currently, I'm working as a change management advisor at Shared Services Canada, helping support the people side of change. In addition, I also work with the Human-Centered Community of Practice here at SSC, and I'm involved with the Agora Network's Student Hub. Moving on to our learning objectives for today. The relationship with your supervisor or manager, it takes time, it takes effort to really make it work. And it can require some better understanding of yourself, your leader, and how you two can work effectively together. Our panelists will share their experiences and insights to help us understand the importance and relationship with one's manager has on career satisfaction. It'll prepare us to have those one-on-one conversations with our managers and help us understand the impact of strained relationships and value add that comes with trust and open communication. Before we get started, we do have a few polling questions for our audience. I can see those are up right now. So for our first question, how do you feel about your manager? 1 being the worst I've had, 5 being the best I've had. Question 2, how long do you think it takes to gain your manager's trust? And question 3, have you spent quality time getting to know your manager and developing a relationship? Now, don't worry, your answers are anonymous. We are not going to go tell your manager. So please be honest and tell us how you really feel. I'll give you a few moments to get those answers in. All right, so the first question, how do you feel about your manager? Our top answer is 4. Question 2, how long do you think it takes to gain your manager's trust? Our top answer is 6 to 12 months of good performance. And for our last question, have you spent quality time getting to know your manager and developing a relationship? Our top answer is yes at 61%. Thank you everyone for sharing with us. I hope that sets the stage for our panelists for our discussion. So now let's meet our panelists today. And I will say there is an interesting dynamic between these two on our panel, and I am so excited for us to learn from both of them. So first, I will pass it over to Kirk Kaya Hamilton for your introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is either Kirk Hamilton or Kaya Hamilton. You see 2 names because I am gender fluid. So it's Kirk as a man, he and him. It's Kaya as a woman, she and her. I've spent 16 years in the public service. It'll be 17 in May. And I will say I've gone to a variety of departments. I started with Passport Canada, went to CRA, worked in auditing, worked in training and learning, HR over at CBSA, National Defense, and I'm now with Infrastructure Canada. I'm a strategic advisor working with our Anti-Racism, Equity, and Inclusion Division. And basically what that means is I sometimes am called on to say all those things that nobody else wants to say. But I'm very lucky because I do have a great manager, actually a great director who you're going to meet in just a moment. And that will go back to what Diana was saying about that unique dynamic. Really, a huge part of what I do, a huge part of my career is just trying to find ways that people can show up to work and be themselves, that they don't have to worry about those things, that it is an inclusive environment. And for those of you who may have a visual impairment, just a quick description. I am a white male, I have short brown hair, a little bit of facial hair, and I'm wearing a green sweater today. Thank you so much, Diana.
Thank you, Kirk Kaya, for that introduction. I will pass it over to Michelle Seymour for your introduction.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. So I am Michelle Seymour, Director of Anti-Racism, Equity, and Inclusion. And in case you didn't put it together just yet, I am Kirk or Kaya's boss. So as we dive into today's discussion about managing relationships with your manager, you'll get to hear a bit about the dynamic between the two of us, as well as how we've tackled that elsewhere in our careers. So I'm a public servant who has just recently celebrated 25 years in the public service. I would say my career is far less exciting, I think, than yours, Kirk or Kaya, in that I started as a co-op student at National Defense, where I spent over 23 years of my career focused in IMIT before moving into this role with Infrastructure Canada in 2021. In this new and emerging space, much like what Kirk or Kai had shared before, I am so incredibly blessed to have such deep and meaningful, enriching conversations with peers, with colleagues inside the department, outside the department, superiors, around things that are difficult to discuss, things that are so deep, meaningful, and personal to those who are impacted by the systems of harm and oppression that are associated with racism, systemic racism, discrimination, and spaces where we don't feel included as people. And when we talk about inclusion, inclusion for me is about more than just members of equity denied or impacted communities, but it's about all of us, each and every one of us. So yes, grateful to be here, and I'm going to hand it back to you, Diana. I know we've got so much to talk about. I don't want to take up more than is necessary in this introduction. So over to you.
Thank you both for taking the time to be here today. As you can see, this is going to be fun. So let's get started. So our first question, Michelle, I will start with you. Tell us about the best relationship you had with a supervisor or manager, and what was it that made it great?
That's a difficult one. And the reason why it's difficult is because I've been really fortunate in my career. There have been managers that have left me wanting to pull my hair out and questioning whether or not I could show up again the next day. But even in that, I've learned invaluable lessons that have helped me to progress in my career and be better prepared as I went forward. And I've also had amazing managers that have helped mold me into who I am today. I think about my very first manager, Shelley Blade. So Shelley interviewed me as a co-op student. And I'd already gone through some different co-op interviews, and they were all about what do you have to bring for me, blah, blah. And you're in there nervous as a student and trying to sell yourself. And the matches that I thought I made didn't align for me. And when I walked into that interview with Shelley, Shelley was focused on, here is what national defense has to offer you. And here are all the reasons why we want you. Starting off from that foot, she opened up the door so that I could freely come to her, whether it was a student or a CS1, a CS2. I could come to her even though she was levels above me and share my thoughts and my reflections. I was never judged or punished when I didn't agree. And oftentimes really heard when I challenged, because she was so open to hearing different perspectives. And along those lines, it brings me to my current manager. There have been so many in between, but the two who stand out for me the most are Shelley, who was there at the very beginning of my career, and Natalie Beltran, who is my ADM, where I am right now. As a director, it's really quite unheard of in a lot of ways that I would report directly to an ADM, and I do. I report to the ADM of Corporate Services and Infrastructure, as well as have a functional reporting relationship to our Deputy Minister, Kelly Gillis. And she has afforded me the space to just be me, to come and be open about the challenges that I face. When I have made a mistake, to say, I'm sorry, and to support me as I look at how do I navigate going forward from there, and encourage me in those moments where I feel like I just can't take another step. So I'd say that would be my description of kind of the best relationships that I've had.
That sounds wonderful. I love that for you. Kirkaya, I hope you had a similar experience. And can you tell us about the best supervisor and manager that you've had, and what was it about that relationship?
I'm going to do a little bit like Michelle in the sense of I'm going to pick two, because there's two that had very different elements, but that shaped not only my career, those interactions, but helped me grow as a person. And that's why I want to talk about the two of them. The first, I was at Canada Border Service Agency, very heavy enforcement-based agency, an agency that has uniformed officers. And I ended up working for Elizabeth Whalen in training and learning. When I went for the job interview, she was not the person that I wanted to work for. I walked in, and the first thing I said to my wife when I got home is, oh my God, I want to work for Annie. Elizabeth scares me. She intimidated me, good Lord. And then I got to know her. And the biggest thing about Liz was she didn't manage me in the way that she thought I needed to be managed. She asked me. She did the number one thing that was so important to me. She listened to what I needed. I told her I wanted somebody to push me. I wanted somebody to challenge me. I wanted somebody who was not going to give me a sugar-coated, oh, well, that's kind of good work. If I did bad work, I wanted to know it. I worked for her writing policy to start. And the very first policy I wrote, I spent a month, I did consultations, I wrote 24 pages. She's like, this is great. She took the last 22 pages, took them, dropped them in garbage can. And I went, what is wrong with you? She goes, great work, but it's not what you need to do. Your job as a policy writer is to put yourself out of a job. Make it simple. And the relationship that Liz and I grew was one, I did a lot of traveling for work. I traveled about 6 months out of the year across Canada. I could call her when I was on the road. I could call her and say, I can't do it today. I can't do it anymore. And she would find a way, not as a manager, but as a person to a person. And that's what I appreciated most about her. It wasn't a manager-employee relationship. It was Liz and Kirk. It wasn't Liz and Kaya because I wasn't out at that point. I hadn't figured that out. But she was always there. She asked those questions. I remember talking to her at one point, and I was having a really rough time. being on the road so much, wasn't home. My wife was not happy about it. And she said, "How are you doing?" And I burst into tears right in the office. I cried. And she goes, "Good. That's how you should be feeling." And a lot of people hearing that might go, "Oh my God, what a horrible woman." But what she wanted me to realize is she already saw that. She knew that's how I was feeling. And she was there. We went and we sat down and we talked for about an hour and a half. And there was no conversation about work. It was human to human. And that's, for me, the best managers I've had have that human connection. And the second person that I'm going to talk about, no, this is not sucking up, but this is where it's an interesting dynamic, is Michelle. Michelle and I first met at National Defense. We were on a panel together, and we shared some very similar values. We shared wanting to make a difference, wanting to look at that inclusion, wanting to look at how racism is impacting people. I have learned from Michelle because I was able to ask her all the questions that other people were uncomfortable about. When I have a day and I need a mental health day, I don't go to Michelle and do the, I'm sick, I need a sick day. I go to Michelle and say, I can't today. I honestly am too hurt, too traumatized, in too much pain. And she doesn't question it. She doesn't challenge it. She is there for me in a way that says, yes, the work is important. The work, we have to get delivered. And there's never been a doubt about that. But as a manager, when I ask her, what do you see in my career? She tells me not only what she sees, but she makes sure that I tell her what I see for myself. She is as invested in my career as I am invested in my career. And there's not a lot of managers that reach that level. They'll talk about, hey, if you need training, you want to go on a course, no problem. Michelle says, what is it you need to succeed? What is that next step for you? And that's, I know that no matter where I go, I'm going to talk to Michelle, whether we go to the same department, different departments, because that's the type of manager I want to be. And when I look at both Liz and both Michelle, what made it a great relationship is they inspired me not to be a manager. They inspire me to be a person who is going to be a leader. And there's a difference between the two. And good managers aren't going to push you to become a manager or something you're not. They're going to push you to become what you want to be and walk with you each step of the way. And that's what Michelle and Liz have done for me. So that's why it's the two of them without a doubt for me.
You both have raised some very good points, but I'm going to move on before Michelle does start crying, because that was beautiful. And I want, as much as I don't want this to take a negative turn, I do want to talk about the worst leaders that we've had, because I believe there's something that we can learn from those experiences. So Kaya, can you tell us the worst leader that you've had that comes to mind, and why was that negative for you?
Yeah, I'm not going to use names or departments because I don't want to do that. People do change over time. But the worst leader for me was the one who made me feel insignificant, who looked at it and made jokes about, who I was as a person, who, you wanted to trust, you wanted to talk to them, and they were not predictable. I couldn't tell if I could trust them, because one moment I felt I could, one moment I felt I couldn't. And what happened is it made me lose confidence in myself, because I didn't know if I was doing a good job, because they'd make those jokes. And when I tried to talk about myself, they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You got to remember, in work, there's two things in life. There's work Kirk and there's home Kirk. And the two can't cross over. And that's why they were the worst manager for me, because I had to stop when I left the house and be like, what am I allowed to show? What am I allowed to talk about? And when I talked about my career, they're like, don't tell me these things about, well, I want to develop in a compassionate way. They're like, compassion has no place in leadership. And I looked at them and went, but we're all people. If we lose sight of that, even if we get the work done, we're not doing it right. We're not giving back to the Canadian public that we're supposed to be serving the right way, because we're too worried about where our energy needs to go and what we need to hide or what we need to pretend. And that manager, when I had conversations about my career, their response was, okay, go do it. I'm like, well, part of the reason I'm talking to you is because I need your support. I need to make connections. I need to reach people. And they're like, well, that's not my job. In their mind, and this is it 100%, the only thing that mattered was work. And the only thing that mattered was keeping private and work lives separate. And if we have to do that, we're not innovative, we're not creative, we're not happy, we're not satisfied, we're not anything positive. And so that's what I learned from that individual. And that's where I kind of went, okay, I don't want to be that person. I want to be the person that my employees come to. And if they say, you know what, here's what's going on with me, I can have an honest conversation and say, I can do this for you, I can't do this for you, without feeling like I'm a bad manager, without feeling like I am not listening to them, but being honest with them and saying, here's everything I can do for you as a person and as a whole person, not just your work person. So that's the worst manager for me, is that one whose work is priority and home stays home, because that's not how human beings are.
And it's definitely not how we work anymore. We're bringing our whole selves to the workplace, and we're experiencing a lot of change right now, especially as we navigate return to workplace. So we're going to have to navigate this all together, and compassion is so important. Michelle, can you tell us about the worst leader that you have ever had, and what was it about that experience?
The worst leader that I had, I would say it was a supervisor. At the time, I had joined a team, junior in a lot of ways, but felt like I was doing really good. And this individual, from their feedback, contributed to where I took myself. Because as much as somebody can tell you things about yourself, it's up to you to believe them. And I got to the point where I believed them, and I felt as though I was incompetent in my job. And it just so coincided with a time where I'd had a car accident. I was dealing with what had been diagnosed as PTSD from my childhood, as well as from the accident. I was trying to find my footing. I had recently been diagnosed with depression, everything colliding all at once. And I felt I could not do my job. I would go to work. I would take the bus into work and be there from about anywhere between 7, 8 o'clock in the morning till about 6 o'clock at night. Then I would bus home, grab a bite to eat, come back to the office with the car. Parking was free, and I'd work until about midnight. And I would do that day in and day out, trying to just seem like I could manage to the level of my peers. And this person came into my office, my supervisor, one day and said, you know, it really doesn't look good that you can't get your work done in the time allotted to you and your peers can. Just wanted to let you know that. This person also undermined me to the extent where I was dealing with clients, and my clients would read my emails and say, Michelle, that doesn't sound like you. And it didn't, because I was not allowed to send an email before printing it, writing it out, printing it, taking it to this individual, having them use their red pen on my hard copy, adjust it, then go back to my desk, readjust it, and hit send. And at the end of it, I didn't know who I was. I didn't have a clue. It broke me. When I took it to the manager, I was told I was the problem. Some people may think, okay, well, maybe racism comes into play. My supervisor was one of the only racialized people I have ever reported to. And that person did a masterful job at undermining my reputation within that team. In my attempt to try and resolve what was happening, got kicked out of the team. we had a meeting on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I said I wasn't happy with how it went. I was told Friday was my last day. I highlighted that I couldn't hand over my files in a way that would ensure my clients were supported in such a short space of time, and I was granted leave to stay until the following Friday. And I did my job, was very professional about it. After I left, so at the time I was with National Defense. I was in a new position, still within the same organization with a different team. And I was concerned about kind of what will that experience mean for me now that I'm going someplace else? Like, what have they said? What is the groundwork they've laid? What am I walking into? And I had a conversation with my manager, my supervisor in the new role, and I said, okay, so things weren't really good. And they're like, we don't want to hear it. We don't need to know what happened. We recognize that something happened over there, but this is a clean slate. It's all about how we build our relationship now that you're here and the work that you do. And they proved that. The supervisor I had accused me of stealing files, sent the military police to my new work location on that basis. I was asked into an interrogation room to have a conversation where I expressed what had happened. I mean, I kept everything soft copy. I gave them all the soft copies. The hard copies that I had that weren't soft copy, I gave those over. Extra hard copies I destroyed. But they had everything. My sent, my received emails, everything. And I'm grateful that those officers understood and recognized that there was something more at play. And so it didn't impact my career. It didn't get in the way of how I was seen and how I could progress. But that was such a difficult time. It took me years to get back my footing and my confidence in myself, to be able to feel like I could just be a part of something meaningful and support a team. Not even anything fantastical in that, but just to be productive. So I would say that was my worst manager. But in that, it taught me how important it is to trust in myself, know who I am, and to not allow the perceptions of others to drive how I see me. It also taught me another lesson, which is about making sure I take all kinds of notes. So when stuff comes back, I'm like, oh, well, you said blah, blah. But that's a whole other side. But really and truly, it was a very difficult time in my life, but it was also so important. And I'll share with you that as years went by, the manager who threw me out of the section came back and apologized to me, because the individual, the supervisor who was undermining me, was doing the exact same thing to them. And they had no clue. And so when they experienced it themselves, they acknowledged how harmful their part in it was. And it really opened the door for a beautiful connection there. And the individual themselves, that supervisor, we ended up working together again. I nearly turned down a promotion because I would be working with that person. And I had a great boss over there that said, no, you know what, I'm going to make sure that there's not going to be any room for their interference or their input, really, in terms of what I was doing. which brought me to a place where I said it was really difficult and I never would have seen myself going back. But because having that support, it allowed me to go back into an environment where I had been so deeply hurt to grow and flourish. That was, I'd say, one of the best jobs I ever had in my life was when I went back there. And the relationship I was able to forge with the same supervisor, while never as good as it could have ever been, was very restorative in nature for myself. So, yes.
Wow. Thank you both for being so vulnerable and for sharing these experiences. You've definitely, I'm sure, hit a chord for quite a few of our participants in the audience who could relate to similar things that they've gone through. So thank you both for sharing those. Say if Kyle asked you this next question. If I don't have a great relationship with my supervisor or manager, how can I initiate a conversation to build an effective relationship?
Yeah, that's a tough one that I get asked a lot. And, I won't lie, I snuck a look at some of the questions and I see people talking about that, of reaching out to their manager and saying, I want, these opportunities. I'd like to do this. I'd like to build this relationship, and managers not engaging. So I'm going to address those types of managers first, in the sense of, if you do your part as an employee, if you reach out, if you try, if you look to engage those conversations and the manager doesn't reply, doesn't respond, or ignores it, what I encourage you to do is ask yourself if that's who you want to work for. And it's a tough question. There's times where we look at the work and we look at things that we enjoy doing, but a huge part of the job that we do are the people that we work with. Those managers that you spend your time working with are going to shape who you become, who you decide to become. They're going to influence how you experience that job. You can't change that person. And that's the number one thing I want to offer everyone. There is no magical technique, no magical question that is going to get that manager to engage. If that manager does not want to engage with you and you've done your part, then you need to ask yourself, what do you want out of your career? What do you want out of a manager? And I'll be honest, I've changed jobs because the manager was not somebody I wanted to work with. They're not somebody I could respect. And if they didn't care about me as a human being, and I'm not saying that, you have to be buddy, invite them to your home for parties or things like that. But if they don't want to engage with you as one human being to another, ask yourself if that's worth the time. Ask yourself if that's a relationship that you want to keep beating your head against. There are times where, whether it's friends or family or managers, you make those changes and cut those people out of your life by making changes. Now, if you have a manager who maybe is really busy, schedule the time. Take the time, ask them, sit down and say, I know you're busy. Don't ask for a meeting that week. Make it a month down the road. Give them the time to plan for it. Because if they truly care, if they're engaged in working with you and you as a person, they're going to find the time. But a lot of time employees kind of get to the point where we want to have these conversations now. Something critical happened. Big project either, is on the getting ready to launch and you want to be part of it, or whatever may occur. Don't try and do it last minute. Because when you look forward, you give the manager time to think, to respond, and they may want to be part of it, but they may be getting a lot of pressure from their manager, or they may be even trying to build a relationship with their manager for their career. That gets into the next part. Please, please, please try not to do it via email. There's a lot of folks who go, I sent an email, I reached out via Teams. I get it. Those are techniques. You may not work in the same area as your boss. I'm old, okay? I'm 45 in May. Use the phone. Use MS Teams. Forge that connection, because sometimes when we use email, we think we've written in a certain tone and a manager may read it in a different tone. It may not be that they don't care. They may look at it and go, oh yeah, this is like the 5th email that they've sent me. But think of it this way. If you had something critically important that you needed a colleague or someone to do, are you sending them an email or are you picking up the phone? you're going to use a different communication technique. So apply that with the manager. Reach out to them, try to make that personal connection. And it doesn't have to be a personal connection of, hey, how are your kids doing in school? Find some common ground. And when it's common ground, you don't have to have the same opinion, but find something that you're engaged in, they're engaged in, and forge the personal connection before saying, this is what I want for my career. Because when you do that, all of a sudden, you're going to help tweak your boss, your manager, to look at you as a person. They're not going to look at you as that widget who is doing these files and delivering. And the last part of it is when you finally get those chances, make sure you have enough time. So often we sit there, probably a lot of us, PMAs, how long do a lot of PMAs last? 15 minutes. Don't make it part of that PMA conversation. Make it a separate conversation. Make it something that you build and grow. When they start to engage, set up ongoing meetings to have that. It's not unlike a little bit like a mentor relationship. You're trying to connect and learn from them as they also learn from you. So share your experiences, ask about their experiences. And ultimately, if that manager does not support you in the way that you want, that you need, find the manager who will. Our careers are too short, life is too short to keep pushing a manager who may never change. So just look for those opportunities, and most importantly, be honest with yourself about what you need from that manager, and encourage that manager to be honest with you about what they can provide, because they may not be able to provide everything that you need, not because they don't want to, but they may not have the support or resources they need as well. So person to person, that's the biggest thing I can recommend.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and can I jump in there? Because some of what you said is so important around the fact that we also have to have that understanding of what we as individuals need. And I know for myself, coming up in my career, I didn't necessarily know what I needed from a boss. And I mean, as I've gone on in time, I've learned a bit more, and I've actually walked into rooms where it's an interview of me, and I've kind of turned it around and interviewed who was interviewing me and that I'd be reporting to, and saying, here are the qualities that I am looking for in a manager. I need a safe space where I can show up and say, you know what, I'm, as Kirk or Kai had talked about earlier, it's a mental health day, and I just can't handle it. Are you going to support me in that moment and punish me later? Or are you going to support me in that moment and support me later? I need to be able to be really honest about what I'm seeing or what I'm experiencing in the role. And I need that openness in return. I need some vulnerability in return. And I recognize not everybody can give that. And I don't expect everybody to give that. But I know that's what I need. And so if the relationship is not one that works for both myself and the manager, then that's clearly not the space where I need to be. And it's somewhat of a privileged perspective, but it doesn't come from a place of privilege. Much of my career was spent in like specific roles, specific teams, being told that essentially we promote from outside, not from within. Essentially, you're good enough to act, but not good enough to promote, and having to find other ways to move. It's really from, how do I show respect and honor myself? And to that end, as we're talking about a manager who isn't engaged and isn't reaching out, or who is really busy, as somebody who is incredibly busy, I try and make sure that I'm available whenever I can be. And sometimes that's after hours, and that's probably really unhealthy in terms of the boundary that I should have with work. But I also want to be there for my staff recognizing that I may not be able to push off all the things that are already in my calendar for the day, but I don't want for them to feel like they're not important, because they are important, and they're not important in the widget sense of I just need this body to do this work and that's it. They're important to me because as people, if they don't understand their importance and their value in the team, then how can they really contribute the best of themselves? And that's really what I want to see. And if the team is not the right space for them, well, let me help you get to where is the best space for you. And it requires that openness in communication that's a two-way street, so that we can each get to a place that is going to be healthy for each of us.
And I think that's a great segue into our last question, which is, what is the benefit of strong relationships between employees and leadership? Kirk, Kai, I'll start with you.
For me, it's simple. It's trust. It's being human in the work that we do. 30, 40 years ago, it was you left your home life at home. If you were having struggles, you were having problems, stress, medical issues, you didn't bring that to work. But the relationships that we're having with managers now are different. I can go to Michelle and I can share, and I'll share this. I have chronic pain. I'm going through a month where I can't take any kind of medication, anything. And I've gone to Michelle and I've explained that. And there are times where Michelle's like, okay, if you need time, just let me know. If I don't have that trust, then I'm not being honest with Michelle. And Michelle then has no ability to look at my work other than what I'm producing. But if I have that ability to say to her, here's what's going on. And there's a story that I'll share very quickly, and it talks about that trust, talks about that impact. Last year, there was the Muslim family that was murdered in London. And it really hit me hard because I have an aunt and an uncle, 4 cousins in London. My uncle and the boys are Muslim. And I had no idea. There was nothing in the article that told me who it was. I didn't know if that could be my family, if that could be people from their community. I didn't know. And I was able to go to Michelle and say, honestly, I don't know if I can work today. I need some time. There's those abilities to have those conversations that let you say, look, do you mind if I take an hour and go do my, pick up my kids and I'll come back and make up the time? The most important part of it is you get to be honestly you, because you can trust your manager that when you share with them what's happening, you can share with them also why it's happening, how you're feeling. Leadership used to be the tell people what to do, be strong, be resolute, no emotions. That's not what leadership is anymore. Leadership is connecting with people on those emotions. It's that ability that when we do a panel like this, I've done some that have been very hard. And I don't have to go to Michelle after and say, hey, do you mind if I take it? She's like, if you need some time this afternoon, take it. Because we now have a bond, not just as an employee and a manager, but as 2 people doing very tough work. Anti-racism, equity, and inclusion work is hard. But even go look at what happened during Phoenix. Okay, and probably shouldn't bring up Phoenix, it's probably a taboo subject, but think of how many employees were working so much overtime, who were stressed, who were ending up on sick leave because they couldn't share with their manager how they were feeling. They couldn't get that support. Managers were watching their staff disintegrating and didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to reach those employees, and because they didn't have that connection. The connection they had is, here's your work, please do these tickets by the end of the day. That's what makes a difference. As a manager, one of the things I say to my staff, and I've talked about my experiences, reporting to Michelle as my manager, but as a manager, I want my employees to tell me the truth. I want them to feel comfortable. And even if it's a matter of telling me something and saying, I don't know what I need, I at least can be there for them. I always tell my employees, I don't want to see you in 3 years. I want you on to the next thing. Call me when you're a DG and ADM, whatever you want to be doing, hire me. My goal is to help them reach what they want to reach. And I can't do that if I don't have that bond with them. Because otherwise, all it is a PMA, a PLP with a couple of courses. That doesn't tell me anything. That doesn't tell me if they're struggling at home, so that I'm not jumping to labor relations to say, oh, there's a performance issue. What it allows me to do is say to that person, is there something that we need to change? Not you need to change, we. And that's, if I can sum it up in one word, having that relationship with your manager changes it from an I to a we, but without losing the I. You don't lose your individuality, your individual needs, but you gain somebody who is going to be there to support you. And honestly, if they're not, personal opinion, I'm moving, because I don't want to be in that environment. The work will always be the work. But when you find managers that care, that are supportive, that want to have a bond, a relationship of trust, it's a whole different work environment. And it goes from being work to being a career. So managers, employees, if you have that connection, you change the dynamic. Nobody wants to go to work. People love going to their career.
Michelle, is there anything you'd like to add to that fantastic answer before we dive into the Q&A?
Quite honestly, I don't know that I can really, but you know, that trust piece is it oh my gosh, I was thinking on it as you were talking, and I think about the times where I've taken a chance and I've reached far beyond what is supposed to be okay. And I go back to Shelley, my first boss. She used to say, it's easier to beg for forgiveness than to request permission. And she empowered us, even as students, co-op students, to go out there and to just do and explain after. You know, as long as you got really good rationale and you could support it and back it up afterwards and things didn't go really sideways, you know, she was always there and had our back. And I'm so grateful for that, because much of my career, when I look at the people around me, they didn't have the same confidence to take those chances and to take those steps. I have sat in rooms with my boss and my boss's boss and said, so what's your plan for me? Where do you see me in a few years? And as they're stammering, going, like I haven't done any succession planning for anyone. And I'm like, I disagree. You know, to be able to have some of those conversations in spaces that people look and say, how in the world did you get here? You're not supposed to be talking to the director. You're not supposed to be talking to the DG. What are you doing in the ADM's office? You know, but because of what I learned from Shelley, and because of the trust that she instilled in me, that even when I got kicked out of the chief of the defense's office, she still had my back, and it didn't derail and hamper my career. So I would say really it comes down to that trust piece in a lot of ways. And when you have that trust, there's an addition of faith, where the manager, their faith in your ability and what you can achieve just becomes evident in so many ways, from what they entrust you to take on as work, from how they support you, from every aspect of life. It's just, it is, yeah, I'd say that's probably the core for me as well.
We have about 10 minutes left. I want to keep these this going, but we have some really good questions in the Q&A, so I want to get through as many of them as we can. So for our first one, Kirk Kaya, with the constant turnover in the government and changing of managers and team leaders, what is the best way to build a relationship with leaders through this constant turnover?
Oh, that's a good question. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. I'll share my answer. And my answer and my approach is, as soon as I either get a new manager, I go to a new team, that's the first thing I'm doing. I make it a priority. I'm not asking them, where do I get my laptop and how do I sign into this or that? I'm asking for them at the beginning. And it's even almost a stage before that. If I'm going to a new job, I ask those questions and start to build that relationship in the interview before I even know I have the job. With managers changing, if you're staying in the job and a new manager is coming in, make some active offers. So sometimes we see managers come in and, maybe you're a CR5, maybe you're an AS1, and you go, well, they're a manager, I can't approach them. They put their pants on the same way that anyone else does. I don't care if they're a DM, a minister, one leg at a time. Make the active offer, reach out, because they're coming into a new team, a new environment. They're probably, it's like bears, and I saw a question about bears, that's why I'm going to use a bear example. Bears are more scared of us. Sometimes managers are as stressed as we are. So reaching out, saying to the manager, hey, is there anything I can do to help you? This is what would help me. Share your working style, your learning style, because when you are open and you share that, oftentimes, and I'm going to say good managers will reciprocate. And if they shut you down and say, hey, get back to work, well, that may be a key sign that you want to leave. But don't wait and don't be afraid. So many people are like, yeah, but the manager's busy. Your manager will always be busy. Okay, that is never going to change. There's a ton of turnover. There's a shortage of people. Make the time at the start and make it a priority and explain to your manager why it's a priority. If you just walk in and you say, yeah, I'd like to talk about my career, they're going to sit there and go, okay, I got a lot on my plate. If you say, look, I really want to, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm looking for, what time is good for you? A good manager will make the time. Don't let that turnover be an obstacle. Let that turnover be an opportunity. And in the same way, if you're a manager, or for those of you who are not managers yet, when you become a manager, make the time intentional. When you're joining a new team, reach out and say to your folks, okay, first week or second week, whatever you want to make it, I'm going to spend 15, 20 minutes with each of you. And people are going to be like, what? That never happens. You then become the manager that those future managers will emulate. So start changing the government tradition of how it used to be done, embrace that turnover, and make it intentional conversations.
I love that. Michelle, our next question. Again, 8 minutes. I want to get through as many. Even when I do my work and go above and beyond, my manager is supportive of me taking opportunities. But when time comes to allow me to take them, I hear excuses like workload and operational requirements. I feel like they're taking advantage of me being a high performer. So they will dump work and complex files on me to keep me in that position. Any solutions to combat this?
Hate to say it, deployment, promotion. It's interesting because I get to sit at some senior leadership tables as we talk about movement of employees, and there is a strong sense of, I can't say ownership, because I mean, it's not to say that managers own their employees, but it's really about the files, the work, and being able to produce. And the concern is really tied to, if a critical piece in the team, a person who is a major part of how we move forward and deliver, leaves, what are we going to do? It is, I remember being moved into a team and everyone around me, not everyone, I'm exaggerating here, lots of people around me seemed like I would joke it was the island of broken toys and misfits. I'm like, why am I here having to pick up the slack for all these other folks? And talking to my manager about it, my manager said, well, I need to at least have some people who can produce. And I know I, as a manager, have had individuals thrown on me because that's the space where they will cause the least amount of damage to an organization. Recognizing that in the public service, it is far more difficult to remove people from positions and from employment as a whole, which is both a blessing and a curse in some ways. And so navigating that, sometimes it's really about having to just take the leap of faith and having someone invest in you. And your question reminds me of when, I know I'm going to try not to talk too much here, reminds me of when I was looking for my next position and I had said, I'm ready for an EX position. I'd been told in 2019 that I would never be an EX, just so you know. And when I said I'm ready for it, I was told, well, good luck. I'm like, well, don't you have anything? Is there something here? Like, what about opportunities? And I was told there were no opportunities. And so when the position was offered, I said, okay, well, hey, I'd love to say, is there anything? They're like, congratulations. It's easy to keep somebody where they are. And quite honestly, I think the way in which my organization handled it, it wasn't a bad thing. It was really good because it's important to step out of where we're at. Oftentimes we get comfortable in where we are and we don't see the potential we can achieve when we step out of that. I spent 20 years in one branch, 20 years under 2 different DGs, 10 years each, always hoping that I was always going to stay there. This is where my career was going to progress. But each time I left and I went to something that was unknown and unfamiliar and uncomfortable, it helped me to grow far greater than if I would have stayed. Not necessarily the answer I'm sure your managers want to hear me give you, but I think it's important to consider not just what's important for the organization. I'll never forget, after spending 10 years loyal to an organization and having to go elsewhere for a promotion and feeling betrayed by it, I learned that my loyalty is not to an organization, it is to a particular individual. If you and I have a relationship and I trust that you have my best interest at heart, I'll follow you. But I can no longer commit to just what this department or that division or that directorate has, because it's bigger than that when it comes to what I need. And so I just caution to keep that in mind.
I wanted to offer one very, very quick comment. Sorry, Diana. To all you folks out there, if you're a high flyer and you feel like you're being penalized or punished for being a high flyer, don't be afraid to make yourself redundant. In the sense of talk to your manager about cross-training somebody else on the team in your files or in those areas that you always get the work. Because if you make it so that if you leave, that they would be absolutely devastated, they aren't going to want you to go. But if you make it so that there's somebody there as a backup, you may find that they may be more willing to let you go on those assignments and assignments.
Great point. I remember I had a boss who had said, oh, everybody's replaceable. And I was so offended. I'm like, oh, no, I'm not replaceable. And she said, you never want to be irreplaceable, because if something ever happens to you tomorrow, the work will still continue. They will step over your warm body, not even your cold, dead body, and still keep going. So remember that you need to be able to live and enjoy your life. So I see Haley's on. I think we're getting the hook.
I think we are getting the hook. I'm going to put one quick offer out there. If you have questions, don't be shy to reach out to Michelle and I. Just because this session ends, and I know we didn't get to all of your questions, I saw there's some incredible ones. We will talk to the youth network about how we can maybe answer some of those and get answers back to you. But if you want to reach out individually, our contact info is there. Reach out. We would love to talk to folks. Doesn't just have to be today. Sorry, Diana.
Agreed.
That's okay. Thank you both for sharing your stories and being vulnerable with our audience today. We really appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you, Finn, for all of your efforts on putting on this amazing conference and helping us learn and grow. And thank you to our participants for being here and for your amazing questions. I will hand it over to Haley to close us out.
Thank you so much, Diana. And thank you, Karkaya and Michelle. This truly has been amazing. And I think I echo all of the participants that your vulnerability has really been appreciated in this. Before we end this session, we do have one final quick poll. The results won't be shared. The question is, was this session a good use of your time? Yes, no, I don't know. Thank you all for joining us today. There is one final session coming up at 2:30, and that's the Ask Me Anything panel. So if there's any questions that you didn't have answered during the last 2 weeks, please join, and now's your time to ask those questions. In addition, we have networking on Wonder Me from 4 till 5 p.m. And we do have some of the speakers that have participated over the last 2 weeks that will be joining us. The link to all the sessions, as well as the networking event, can be found on the VExpo. All of the resources will be available on the wiki page, and the recording of this event will be available on our YouTube channel later this evening. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.